It's a transportation hub, home to iconic seafood restaurants, and located next door to the region's largest employer. But despite those assets, efforts to revitalize Mayport Village have languished. My guests today hope that may be changing. Here to discuss it, I'm joined by Nancy Powell, Executive Director of Scenic Jacksonville. Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning.
Bill Gulliford, former City Council President, Atlantic Beach Mayor, and board member with the Mayport Waterfront Partnership. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Ann.
And Dr. Georgette Dumont, Associate Professor at UNF and moderator of next week's discussion about Mayport Village. Good morning. Welcome back, Georgette.
Good morning, Ann.
So, Georgette, why is now the time for a community conversation?
We being Jacksonville and Mayport Village in particular, are at the cusp of really breaking out, per se. And you see a lot of momentum in Jacksonville. You see it with the population boom that we're getting into the city. And Mayport Village is it is a charm of Jacksonville that could really help Jacksonville as a whole, as well, with some identity. The history of Mayport Village and the potential with the fishing, with shopping, coffee shops, and everybody knows about the Mayport Ferry. And it's at a crucial location, right at the crux of A1A where it stops. You got to take the ferry to get to the other side of A1A. And there's so much potential there. And we see it kind of growing within the area. And Mayport Village has a chance to finally get over and pop and the goal of the panel is really to put a spotlight onto Mayport Village and to let individuals know how they can be involved with moving Mayport Village forward in a way that honors its history, respects its residents, and still gets it to go into the future to be an even better place based off of its history, its past.
Bill, let's talk a little bit about the history because obviously there is a long, rich history of Mayport Village and the land that, even before that, when it was occupied by Timucuan Indian,
Right.
the Mocama, I guess, that lived there back before Jean Ribault landed. And so there's, hundreds of years of history in Mayport Village, but we often think about it in the terms of kind of the fishing history of Mayport Village. And that goes back, I guess, until the early 1800s.
Oh, gee, I think it went even further than that. I mean, remember the French settled there in 1562, 3 years before the Spanish settled in St. Augustine. And from that point on, actually, there are Spanish soldiers buried in Mayport. And that history started after they threw the French out and continued up until the present day. And so I suspect on an informal basis, you certainly had a lot of fishing going on in the early days. And I think, the negative part of it is that the Navy had to take a good bit of the property there, and that sort of suppressed the Mayport Village. But I think the biggest impediment was when Jacksport decided to try and put a cruise terminal there. And so for 10 years or so, that they bought up all the property, and that property just languished. And
I want to get into the cruise ship history a little bit more deeply, but start back a little bit with Mayport, the arrival of the naval base, because for a long time, Mayport Village was a much larger
area,
parcel.
yes.
Yeah, and it also really connected to East Mayport. I mean, it was part of this whole community.
Went all the way to the coast.
Right.
You're absolutely right.
And so when the base was put there kind of right after Pearl Harbor, yeah?
Yeah, actually, I think it started pre-Pearl Harbor, but it was very close to the start of the Second World War, and of course it continued to grow, and that there were carriers there at one time, so it became a significant base for the Navy. You mentioned areas that they took over, one of which is the land that the lighthouse sits on, which has always been an issue. We've always wanted to gain access to it, or most lately we're talking about moving the lighthouse to the riverfront. There's a very aggressive group that is pursuing that. I hope they're successful.
And people who aren't familiar, the lighthouse sort of sits right beyond the fence that encloses the naval station. And so you can see it, but you can't access it.
The Navy has refused to let us access. It has sensitive equipment in that area, and they just don't want to open it up to the public. So I can understand that. So the best alternative would be to move it if that's possible. It's possible. It's just expensive.
And so this is now, generations of kind of shrimp fishermen were based in Mayport. And even after the naval base arrived, Mayport Village continued to be a thriving fishing
Very much
Village.
so. Very much
Um,
so. I grew up at the beach, and I can remember kids that went to school with me from Mayport, and they were all fishermen. You know, they were all part of a fishing community there, and it was very active.
so this is, as Georgette said, it's also home to the ferry,
Right.
and that's been a kind of critical piece of infrastructure, but not without issue. I mean, it has been occasionally eyed for decommissioning. There was this whole kind of hot potato thing that happened. Like, who's going to pay for it? Is it the states? Is it the cities?
Well,
Should Jacksport run it? Now JTA runs it. What's the deal with the ferry? Just kind of bring us to.
real quickly,
Mhm.
the state decided to dump it in the city's lap. So I don't know why the city didn't resist it. So the city takes it over, and they get Jacksport to handle it for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, Jacksport says, we don't want it. And I was on the council at that time, and we were looking at the possibility that the ferry would be shut down, which would be horrible. So we passed legislation and created a ferry commission to run it. And thankfully, JTA took the ferry over and has done an outstanding job of upgrading. And now they're going to have a second ferry because, frankly, if that ferry had shut down, Mayport would have been a little community at the end of the road and not very successful in that kind of an environment. So, yeah, ferry is very important, I think, to Mayport. And we have people that come just to ride on the ferry. I met some people from Tennessee that they said every time they go south, they come by way of the ferry.
Sure. And, shutting it down is a giant round trip for people, Nancy, if they're,
You know,
instead of, a mile trip across the ferry, it becomes a 24-mile, kind of one-way trip where you have to go over the Dames Point Bridge and up Heckscher, and it is a roundabout. But the state hasn't always believed that even though it's part of A1A, that it is an essential piece of infrastructure. And so that debate hopefully is behind us.
We hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, because one of our events, we did ride the ferry over
Yeah.
to the other side, and people really enjoyed it. And
Yeah.
some people use it as a transportation, as a commuter up to Amelia Island. It's a gateway to the Timucuan Preserve on both sides of the river. And it's now called the Jimmy Buffett Memorial Highway.
Right.
So there are scenic organizations, scenic A1A organizations that are dedicated to beautifying and promoting those, A1A. Some people just travel A1A,
Yeah.
all the way down Florida.
Yeah.
And so getting across at that point is really important. And it's a 5-minute ride.
Right. And what is Scenic Jacksonville's interest in particular in this little corner of Northeast Florida?
Well, we chose Mayport. This is the second year of this program called Scenic Visions. So some of your listeners know that our annual signature event is something called the Great City Symposium, where we bring in a speaker from out of town and have a big event once a year to talk about how downtowns and cities thrive. And a few years ago, we thought we'd like to take it down to the neighborhood level and introduce people to areas that maybe they've been to a long time ago, maybe they've never been, or areas like Arlington, which was our first one, and Mayport, which have deep cultural history and efforts already underway by existing organizations. So we're not interested in, telling other neighborhoods how to revitalize, but we would like to just shine a spotlight on those by working with the organizations. And in this case, in last year too, we had 2 experiential events. So we had a trolley tour and a walking tour with OSearch and the ferry and the Timucuan people, the Timucuan Parks Foundation. And then we conclude with a panel discussion, which is more of a civic event. And it's next Wednesday at 5:30, November 12th. And Georgette is agreed to be our panelist, our moderator, and Bill is one of the panelists. We also have Chris Fisher from OSearch. So OSearch is another big part of the future of Mayport, and that's one of the things that really sparked our interest, is that there are lots of existing momentum happening already, and it does need some more, but it's not like there isn't a lot of people working towards improvement.
Right. And we should say that event is at the Bill Gulliford Community Center,
Whatever.
named for our guest.
It's still not getting me a discount at Starbucks.
Well, there's no Starbucks yet in Mayport, but there is.
No, but it will be.
Yeah, Georgette, there is, though, some new investment in Mayport. I mean, OSearch is a big part of it because the promise of that research center, which, their boat is based there, they're partnering with Jacksonville University. So there is this sort of like huge educational potential, but they're still in the fundraising stages in terms of building that permanent facility. Is that correct?
I believe they are. And so we have the research piece, and then there's also the business piece and how we want the waterfront there to be able to be utilized in a way that's true to the area's history. So how do we get businesses there? There's a very successful little local coffee shop, and they have a standing room only.
Coconut Key.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like parcel by parcel at the moment with development coming in. And so OSearch is there that's that research and the scientific piece. And then then we see a business piece, and then we can see the development within, like just having more families and parks and more multi-transportation, so sidewalks and bikes and all that stuff. So it's a beautiful little gem. One of the key pieces is there aren't many fishing villages left in
Yeah.
the U.S.
Yeah.
Small little fishing villages.
Yeah.
I'm from New England, and I come from it's a lot of fishing up there. Little tiny small fishing villages. You don't see that anymore, and so that is something that is really critical to try and keep there.
Really
And
special.
and it can draw in. It can draw in visitors. It can draw in just people who already live in Jacksonville to see what's right in their backyard.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, we are talking to Nancy Powell, Bill Gulliford, and Georgette Dumont about plans to revitalize historic Mayport Village. If you have memories of Mayport or thoughts about how and what would lure you back, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. We have a question from Denise saying, ask Mr. Gulliford to talk about the Mayport Waterfront Market on the banks of the St. Johns River in, quote, downtown Mayport. So this is a new thing that got kicked off just last month.
Yes, and thus far it seems like it's going to be very successful, and we're doing it once a month, and I think you'll see a bigger effort in 2026 because they're just feeling their way along, and Mitch Reeves, our chairman, has really been instrumental in getting that up and going. And I
This
think
is like a once a month market?
and it's in part of the open area. The 7 acres is basically open right now, except for the buildings at 4610. But it's wide open, and I would encourage people to come because we think it'll grow even bigger.
And it's my understanding that's going to be on the third weekend of the month.
I think that's what it is.
Okay.
I haven't been able to go yet. I've had conflict every time that they've done it, but next one I'm going.
It's the third Saturday of each month.
Third Saturday. That's right. And so the first one in October. So you talk about that land bill, and that address in particular is something that people who are familiar with Mayport will recognize because that was a really crucial piece of land. And I just want to kind of go back into the history a little bit because that area that is open right now is land that was given to Jacksport when they agreed to take on the ferry back in the day when the city couldn't afford it, and Jacksport kind of acquired some property from the city and from some private owners.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They planned to put a cruise ship terminal.
Right.
And this would have been an enormous cruise ship, as cruise ships are, but this would have really almost dwarfed the city, at the village itself.
Right. Well, when I was on the council, I want to give accolades to Eric Green. Eric Green and I got together and figured out how we could possibly transfer that ownership of that property to the city of Jacksonville.
Remind us, Eric Green.
Oh, the CEO for Jacksport. And so we were able to come up with an agreement that transferred the property. It also had a provision in there where Jacksport and the city would share 50-50 any net gain on sale or lease of the properties or properties. And so that gave us a starting point for development. I mean, basically, the city has nothing invested in that property, and of course, then we went and I heard Chris Fisher, and I said we got to have that guy in here, and we need
Chris Fisher from OSearch.
From OSearch, we approached him. I approached him about the possibility of locating in Mayport, and I was able to get my colleagues to agree to lease property to them, and also the city has provided a dock that's now fully built, and that's where OSearch ties up. They have $10,500,000 from the state that is available to build a research facility. They need more. You mentioned funding and raising money. Yes, they need to raise more money. Anybody out there that's listening that wants to give a big chunk of money to OSearch is going to have an impact that nobody can anticipate on this area. I mean, he is into great white sharks, but it's going to be even more than that in the future. That's just because they're the apex predator. And so Chris Fisher is a visionary, OSearch's leader, and I think you're going to see incredible impact. Do you know they have over 1 billion hits on their app, on their
The shark
phone
tracking
app?
app.
The shark tracking
People
app.
who don't know OSearch, they go out and they kind of land sharks, they tag them, they track them, and then they also do a lot of science around their habitat loss or, kind of how they're doing. And so that facility, once it's built out, will, as we said, kind of have this educational aspect because JU's involved.
Exactly. I mean, Chris told me that they have people who will drive 200 miles just to meet the vessel and see what they're doing. And it's an incredible draw. So
And Chris is going to be on the panel next week.
Yeah.
So you
Right.
get to hear directly from him.
Exactly. That's a good point. He's truly a visionary.
So that's the state of the property now, and it is
Right.
vacant, as you say. But I believe that, and I'm not sure where the funding came from it, but I know that you brought in Haskell to kind of create an
Right.
idea of how this property could be repurposed, revitalized, and it has a big emphasis on resiliency.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the realities of climate impact when it comes to Mayport Village, because this is a place that is at the confluence of the St. Johns River, the ocean, the intercoastal. There's marshes all around it. It is tiny. It's right at the edge of, where some big waves can hit. And projections aren't great. When you kind of look, we have, I think, an image of one of the maps that was included in the Haskell report that sort of shows a lot of blue and not a lot of brown, in
Right.
terms of the future property there. So, first of all, just realistically, when you're looking at Mayport and saying, in 75 years, in 2100, whatever, is there going to be an A1A to reach Mayport? Is it going to be underwater as some projections have it? What will be left of the actual village?
The state is already working on raising the road, the entry point into Mayport, and I've talked to them on several occasions about that, and they're sincere. They recognize the road will actually flood sometimes, so we know that we got an issue there. As you mentioned, Haskell anticipated the need for addressing the resiliency issue, and I think in their master plan they did a pretty good job. I think it's certainly there's potential. Remember, resiliency has to happen out there because the Navy base is so important. And if the Navy base reacts to the need for resiliency, then the surrounding areas are going to have to also be addressed because if it floods the other areas, it's going to go into the base, is it not?
Yeah.
So I think we've got a safe posture in terms of the future. It's just going to be, where is the money going to come from to address it? That's the big. And this young man from from the University of Georgia did a lot of research on resiliency, et cetera. And I think the outcome was pretty positive as far as the future in that regard.
And when you talk about the Navy, obviously they'll have to make their own plan.
Right.
Their impact is undeniable in terms of the current state of Mayport Village. Have they ever been a resource ever offered to kind of help with the revitalization process, knowing that the location of that base is partly what kind of created this isolated little part of the area?
You're trying to create a guilt trip for the Navy here, Ann.
Why not?
Sure, I understand. No guilt, but they have been cooperative. I mean, in the sense that they attend our meetings. There's a lot of give and take. Each time that there's a new CO, he's made an appearance and made himself available. I think they're a good potential partner and neighbor. I think in the future it'll be even stronger. So and we've yielded to them. We've restricted. They wanted a restriction on height. I think now it's
Right.
restricted to 58 feet, something like that, because of flight
And no
patterns
cruise ships.
and no cruise ship. I got to believe that if that had ever gotten really, really serious, the Navy would have stepped in and said no anyway. I think it would have represented a horrible security issue.
Yeah, and I guess that's why this overlay that was put in place
Yeah.
most recently prevents tall buildings,
Yeah,
prevents
exactly.
a giant cruise ship or any ship that carries more than I think like 600
Yeah.
people. Nancy, I want to ask you about the resiliency component because you've also Scenic Jacks has worked and helped create the Jacksonville Climate Coalition. You've worked on the Riverfront Parks Initiative. The way that this Haskell plan looks at Mayport is very much about building a green waterfront that is floodable. And so the buildings that they're proposing are kind of on the back end of it. And then there's this whole greenscaped area that has swales, bioswales, and all kinds of stuff. It really, I mean, we've had to change the way we think about riverfront parks.
Yeah, I mean, this was very consistent when we started looking at Mayport and saw that action plan, and we know the Haskell folks from the community and all the great work that they've done. So it's perfectly consistent with other parts of coastal Jacksonville, and the downtown riverfront parks have the same issue, and they're building resilience into those parks. It's a buffer. I think that's the approach that a lot of waterfront cities are using is using the coast as buffer, but when they're not flooded, there are recreational areas, there's riverwalk. People love to be by the water, right?
Yeah.
That's just and so it can really coexist, and it can coexist with building. There are new building standards for resilience that can protect the first floor, the second floor. We've seen that. So it can coexist with new buildings, and it's a balance but people love riverfront access. And the 7 acres at Mayport, haven't been they haven't been taken, right? So there is opportunity to either parcel by parcel or, all together, create what's the next step as far as doing both of those things, providing access in the docks and the ferry, provide access to. It's a very active boating, fishing already. It's the busiest. The Scanlon boat dock is
Oh
about
yeah,
the
yeah. The
busiest
boat
fishing.
ramp, yes, it's the busiest one in Jacksonville by far. Go out there on a weekend and try and
Yeah.
launch your boat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
busy.
Yeah.
We are talking about the future of Mayport Village. We have a question from John on Facebook. He said, or a comment saying, any effort to grow the village, if successful, will likely cause a loss of the culture in trade off for cookie cutter housing and McMansions lining the waterfront. I'm sure that is the kind of concern that people who
It-
claim generations
we,
there have expressed.
Well, what he needs to understand is, first of all, the partnership has control over what gets built. We have to approve things. Even the coffee shop, for instance, that came in, we had to approve the design, et cetera. There is no anticipation of having residential on that parcel, that riverfront parcel. Now, will development have an impact on the surrounding areas? Sure, it will to some extent, but I don't think it's going to be allowed to be built out in a way that would be detrimental to the culture or the history or the community itself. And I think as long as partnerships involved, that won't happen.
What about the fishing industry itself? Georgette, I'll ask you, but I mean, I'll ask you as well, Bill. When the port bought all these parcels of land in and around Mayport and agreed to take over the ferry, and then it kind of turned out, well, the land that they've acquired, they want to put a cruise ship on, and then they kind of got rid of the ferry. So there was sort of this like transactional thing that happened. Ultimately, they gave that land back to the city, and so that's the land at question. But there are, questions about the future of that land and what is the best use, right? It's obviously, as Bill says, it's going to have to be negotiated through the partnership. Um, what kind of voice are you asking the community to have in weighing in?
Well, there are multiple organizations that the community can engage with. One of them is Mayport Partnership. Then they can engage with OSearch. There are just different entities, as well as engaging with Jacksonville City Council. Roy Diamond is the current representative for that area. And so you engage with them, you let them know what you want to see in that area. I like to tell my students that it's best to start with these smaller units. So if you can engage these nonprofits, volunteer with them, go to their meetings, find out what the plans are, and you get to have a say on the front end instead of waiting to the way at the back end when all the work has been done and then you show up at the last minute saying, I don't think I like that idea. So you want to make sure that you get involved early on, be a voice in the process as to what you want to see in your neighborhood, especially for those who live in Mayport as well as the businesses
And you
there.
pointed out to me before this show, which is worth noting, that this is part of the consolidated city of Duval County of
Right.
Jacksonville. It is not part of the beaches
No.
communities officially. It's not in the footprint of Atlantic Beach. But I'm curious, what role or what interest has the council member that represents that area, Rory Diamond, had in this process? Has he been participating in these conversations?
To some degree, I would say, but I want to go back quickly to what Georgette and expand on that. The partnership has members that are Mayport residents, and we encourage membership of Mayport residents. We want them to be engaged and involved in decisions made relative to Mayport and how it gets developed in the future, et cetera. So, what do we want it to be? Well, I'll give you my vision. I would ultimately love to see it a cluster of some restaurants, some small shops, maybe a boutique hotel. Remember that 7 acres is shrinking because of our commitment to, say, O-Search, which is going to take part of it, et cetera. So you're not talking about a huge area, but I think it could be attractive enough that it would be really, really what people would desire and hope for in the future.
Well, the event and the community conversation that's coming up, as you said, Nancy, it's Wednesday, November 12th. It's 5:30 to 7:30 at the Gulliford Community Center in Mayport. Thanks so much for coming on today, Nancy Powell, Bill Gulliford, Georgette Dumont. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.